Hello and welcome to This Week on Planet Earth. I'm your co-host Jacob.
And I'm co-host Matty, where each week we break down the latest space exploration, science, and technology news.
So without further ado, let's get into this week's stories. So I'm going to kick this week off with a story on magnets, which I don't think me and you know much about, but it's a cool and interesting topic to kick it off with. And basically, uh, researchers propose a method of magnetizing a material without applying any external magnetic field. So the
Mm-hmm.
study shows that the phenomenon can be produced by a means of adiabatic compression. I hope I got that word right. If I did, I'm getting better at getting words right. Without any exchange of heat within the environment, and the process aligns the spin of the material's particles and magnetizes the system.
Yeah, so I really don't understand a lot of science behind this, but the applications are quite useful because obviously a lot of our sort of devices nowadays rely on magnets for sort of memory and those sorts of things. So if they're able to create things without sort of applying very strong electromagnetic fields, then that's potentially a great way to make sort of devices, electronic devices, really easily. So yeah.
Yeah, it says here to help understand the phenomenon, it is worth recalling the basics of spin and entropy. And then it shows a fancy little diagram.
Yeah,
So,
I really don't understand any of the
yeah.
science. But if people are interested, adiabatic sort of compression and making magnets, they can look at it themselves and maybe tell us about
Yeah,
it.
that's cool.
Yeah, so my other bit of my first bit of space science news is also something that I really don't know much about, but this group of scientists have seen this very surprising short gamma ray burst,
Yeah.
and they've sort of come up with this new method, this new idea of how these might have formed. So the they used to think that they originated from neutron stars smashing together, but they've seen this new one, which was recorded in August 2020, and this new paper's just been released about it, where they think it was the core of a star collapsing similar to a black hole, but then it's able to sort of punch back through itself and make these very short gamma ray bursts that last for about 2 seconds or so. So gamma ray bursts usually are quite long; they last for quite a while, and you see them for sort of days or weeks. So to see it just as like a 2 second flash was quite rare, and they think they've got a new sort of understanding about how that's happened.
Yeah, that sounds
Cool.
interesting. I always like it when we have like new discoveries in astronomy because it just
Mhm.
blows my mind. Anything that's massive or super small, I like it because it makes me question everything. So we'll keep on the trend with things that we don't really understand but are kind of cool and important. So I found this cool little thing today, and basically it's stating that Google claims that they've they know how to, or they've created the first time crystal.
Mhm.
And basically breaking it down in what could prove to be a monumentous accomplishment for fundamental physics and quantum physics, scientists say they finally figured out how to manufacture a scientific oddity called a time crystal. Time crystals harness a quirk of physics in which they remain ever changing yet dynamically stable. In other words, they don't give off energy as they change conformation, making them apparent violations of the natural law of all things gradually turn towards entropy and disorder.
Mhm.
But I'm probably going to go way off here now, but isn't, from my like little bit of understanding in quantum computers, isn't the difference between quantum computers and normal computers is because normal computers operate off the electron, don't they?
Mhm.
And then
Yeah,
quantum computers operate off like quarks and
yeah. They call them qubits, like
yeah,
quantum bits of information. So the idea is that an electron can be an on or off state, whereas a qubit can be a superposition of those. As like
yeah,
it could be any sort of superposition of those. So I think the interesting thing about this is, and reading it, I think there's obviously a lot of work before it becomes like applied to technology. But one of the big sort of problems that we have with quantum computing is that your qubits tend to sort of disorganize themselves and um, sort of just basically fall apart after
yeah,
a while. So you have to keep them at very, very low temperatures, like basically zero, to stop them just jiggling apart. But they will have a natural tendency because of entropy to sort of decay into disorder. So what they're hoping these time crystals will do is that they can be quantum objects and they can take on superpositions and sort of change as they want to, but they don't fall apart because they're dynamically stable. They don't decay. So I think that's the sort of thing that they're hoping for. And if they can do that experimentally, it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, no, it sounds real cool. I like the name time crystals as well. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi film or like a Crash Bandicoot game.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of a headline maker, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
So my second bit was also Google, but it was very much in the sort of normal computing world. So this is Google announcing their new smartphone, Pixel 6, and they have moved to custom-built silicon. So their new processor called Tensor, Google sort of replicating what Apple have done with their in-house chips and moving away from the sort of Qualcomm and Intel stuff. So it's definitely a big step for Google because typically Google they've been trying to move into the hardware thing for a couple of years now, haven't they?
Yeah.
But by doing their own silicon, it means that they can implement their software more efficiently. So a lot of Google's stuff on the Pixel phones in particular, the Pixel phones up until this Google 6 have only got one camera on them, but they still have some of the best like photographs because of their sort of computing power and their computational photography.
Yeah.
So if they're able to design chips to implement some of that stuff in hardware and do it more efficiently and faster, then that's a massive boost for them, for their Pixel thing, for their Pixel phones. But I think they would probably see them implement chips in sort of Chromebooks and other devices. There has been talks of like a Pixel Watch as well. So Google definitely moving into hardware more and trying to use their software advantage as a hardware advantage as well. So.
No, that sounds interesting. I'm excited to see what comes of that. Yeah. I like the Pixel phones, to be fair, and I'm a huge fan of the M1 chip over at Apple too. So I can imagine it'll be good. So for my final bit of news, I found this lovely world-ending title because you know how I like to make something slightly depressing each week. So this one is Ancient Ice Filled with Viruses May Reveal the Future of Earth's Microbiome. And basically a paleontologist called Lonnie Thompson, who's been studying ice since the 1970s, basically has been saying that ice is kind of the same as like taking a photo, and it kind of stores things in times, which I think we've all seen from those like ice sample documentaries where they go and check out glaciers and stuff like that. But what they're saying with this is that even though microscopic life and stuff kind of doesn't do like a huge impact to the eye, it does over like a long period of time. And they think that they can like look at how over thousands and millions of years microbes have changed and what directions it's kind of going in thousands and millions of years in the future. But it looks kind of cool. I always find these kind of things interesting because you always get those clickbait ones as well, don't you, where it's like the permafrost in Russia is melting and the Black Plague is coming out. And that's probably partly true because there probably were people around that died in that ice and stuff. But
there's definitely one on Svalbard in Norway. There's graves of like smallpox victims and things that they reckon might thaw out and people like tamper with and stuff. So
it's a scary one. There's a I can't remember what it's called now, but there's like a TV show where they're in space and they go, I think they're on Mars or they're on the moon, and they get exposed to like a pathogen, but it's literally just like the flu. But it's just all they needed was insulin, but because it's in the future, they just all get messed up by it because they forgot like it was still a thing anymore and no one had their jabs to it anymore. But yeah, it's interesting. I like to see what will come from this research because it's looking like so far they've managed to go back to 15,000 years ago. So
yeah, it's definitely interesting. Reading through it, really cool stuff in there. So,
33 viruses they've found so far, which is always fun.
33 more things to worry about.
Yeah. Viruses must just be such a SEO ping at the moment for anybody writing any article.
Definitely. Yeah, so my last bit of news was on the US infrastructure bill that is being passed, might pass, has gone through, depending what is happening at the moment. But basically, the US is pushing through this big new bill that's going to give about £550 billion to infrastructure across the country. So I thought I'd talk about it because we've been in our Infinite Voice series talking about the future of sort of transport and tech. So it relates to that quite nicely. But yeah, basically a lot of America's infrastructure is really sort of behind the times. Overall, they've been rated as C minus. They on this sort of infrastructure review that sort of a lot of countries get involved in. So C minus is not good, and in particular things like railways and roads are pretty poor. They're down to like the D level. So yeah, they've sort of pushed through this bill with £550 billion of spending. And there's a lot of money going into some quite impressive things. So they said they're planning to put 110 billion into funding of roads, bridges, major sort of transport projects, things like bridge repair. There's 11 billion going into transport safety programs, 39 billion to modernize public transit, and 89 billion for public transit over the next 5 years. So they seem to be sort of pushing a lot of money into this. And I know one of the criticisms is that sort of the bulk of it is going into sort of roads and sort of traditional cars, when it's not really, that's maybe not where the money should be going. So, for example, EV infrastructure, only 7.5 billion of it is going into EV chargers, whereas compare that to the 110 billion that's being spent on roads. So yeah, there has been some criticism of it, but I think it's a good sort of starting step for America, sort of developing public transport and infrastructure and things.
Yeah, just looking at it now, they've really covered everything, haven't they? They want to do like high internet speeds.
Yeah.
electric buses. Yeah, water I can imagine is a huge one. It blew my mind when I was out in Texas and there was just like a tap that wasn't the one in the kitchen. And I like poured a glass of water. They're like, "You're not going to drink from that, are you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?"
So it says here up to 10 million American households and 400,000 schools lack safe drinking water in America. That's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, that is nuts. Now that'll be really cool to see if all this stuff actually gets done, to see how it benefits it.
Yeah, there's some about power infrastructure as well after what happened with Texas and their grid going down in the winter storm. So yeah.
Well, how interesting. Well, yeah, thank you for everyone that tuned in to this week on Planet Earth. We will catch you in the next one. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you give it a like down below, because obviously it's on YouTube. And if you want to let us know any cool stories or anything that we've missed, you can let us know down in the comments. And if you want to follow us on social media, it's @Wope News on Instagram. And yeah, we will catch you next episode.